If there's one thing that I'm always excited about, it's the prospect of player movement in the NBA. And we got the biggest blockbuster trade that we potentially could have gotten the entire year about a month ago when James Harden was officially traded from the Houston Rockets to the Brooklyn Nets. But there is a prospect of potential player movement this year as well, and as teams are starting to discover more and more information about themselves and how good that they truly are, we should get an idea of some players that are potentially going to be traded before the trade deadline. Now, before we get to the content, take a moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. And now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Only thing that's more overpriced than Starbucks lattes is the price of cable and dealing with cable companies that are going to be consistently charging you hidden fees. As a result, I cut the cord recently because there's finally an alternative that gives you the cable TV experience at half the price. And it's called Fubo TV. Fubo TV comes with over 100 of your favorite channels, including complete coverage of all of your favorite sports with all local broadcasters in most markets, all major sports league networks, and most importantly to me, NFL Red Zone, ESPN, ABC, and CBS. And most importantly, you can stream select games in 4K quality. Plus, you can record your favorite games and shows on Fubo TV's Cloud DVR and watch anywhere on any device. Other streaming services can't compete with the breadth of entertainment that comes with Fubo TV, and coming in at half the cost of cable. Fubo TV is the best option for cord cutters everywhere. It only takes 2 minutes to sign up and start streaming all of your favorite cable channels with no cable box required. You can try it for free and cancel anytime, no hassle, and no gotchas. Sign up for a risk-free trial of Fubo TV and get 15% off your first month by going to FuboTV.com/flight. That's FuboTV.com/flight to start your free trial and get 15% off your first month of Fubo TV. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Let's start this list with an individual that was actually traded during the 2020 trade deadline, and that is Andre Drummond. Originally, the Detroit Pistons traded Andre Drummond because they believed that he was going to opt out of his contract and sign with a brand new team in free agency. And well, they were wrong. They traded him to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and believe it or not, against what I even thought myself, he decided to opt in for another season with the Cleveland Cavaliers and is set to hit free agency this offseason, which is why I think he's about to be traded. When you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers roster, they have Kevin Love, Andre Drummond, JaVale McGee, Larry Nance, and they recently just traded for Jarrett Allen. And by the way, huge props to them for that trade because they didn't have to give up much to get a stud like Jarrett Allen on the team. Andre Drummond has been more or less the same player for the past 3 years of his career, averaging very similar numbers over the past 3 years of his career, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Yeah, he's not going to have this ability to stretch the floor, but he is a consistent double-double threat, and a pretty good double-double threat as well, averaging 17.9 points per game and 14 total rebounds this year, and typically the numbers end up at the end of the season looking around 17 and 15, which are fantastic numbers. The caveat is he's not a good free throw shooter, he's not a three-point shooter at all, but he is a good defensive player in the interior and a good defensive presence. The problem is whoever ends up trading for Andre Drummond is probably going to have difficulty re-signing him in the offseason because Andre Drummond hasn't been able to come to grips with his actual value as a player in the modern NBA. Yeah, if this was 2005, I would happily shell out a max contract for Andre Drummond, but at this stage of his career, traditional centers are at the absolute bottom of the NBA totem pole because shooting is at a premium currently, and unless if he could entice a team to offer him Clint Capella money, then I don't really see him getting the contract that he desires. Nevertheless, a team could potentially trade for Andre Drummond to potentially make a run in the playoffs, and could even use him as a one-year rental. I'm looking at you, Boston Celtics. You guys could desperately use a traditional center. Up next, we have Russell Westbrook, and a potential trade for Russell Westbrook completely hinges on the shoulders of how much longer the Washington Wizards want to drag on the Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal experiment. It's been 22 games, and these two are just not a good pair for one another. I'm sure there are other issues, but Bradley Beal historically hasn't been a good defensive player, and Russell Westbrook is currently playing the worst basketball of his career. And this is nothing against Russell Westbrook or Bradley Beal. I'm rooting for both of them to succeed, but speaking as a general manager that has young players like Deni Avdija and Rui Hachimura on the roster, and considering the fact that you're paying Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook a huge amount of money just so you could be the worst team in the East, I believe it's in their best interest to trade Russell Westbrook to a team that is better suited for his skill set. And well, if we're going to be including Russell Westbrook in trade rumors, then we might as well include his teammate Bradley Beal. And Bradley Beal is essentially the same story as Russell Westbrook, only he's on a better contract and is a significantly more productive offensive player. Look, I find it extremely endearing that Bradley Beal has this much loyalty to the Washington Wizards franchise. There hasn't been a single point where he demanded a trade, and he truly just wants to win a championship, ideally in Washington. But the fact of the matter is, the odds of that happening are slim to none. Russell Westbrook and him haven't been working out so far, and the rest of his team is still trying to develop. They are the worst defensive team in the entire NBA, and at this point, I feel like if you're the Washington Wizards, and I've said this in multiple videos, you may as well do whatever it takes to get a good return on a star player like Bradley Beal, as opposed to just holding on to him for dear life. Yeah, I understand you're a smaller market, and it's very hard to find good, loyal players that will commit to your franchise long term, and that does make Bradley Beal a unicorn. There's not many players like Bradley Beal nowadays that will be nearly as loyal to a franchise as he is. But if you could trade Bradley Beal to a team that could return a couple of first-round draft picks that fit within the timeline of Deni Avdija and Rui Hachimura and any other young players that you have on your roster, and then continue moving forward with an emphasis on the development of those players, coupled with the fact that you're probably going to get a top 4 NBA draft pick this year, and a pretty damn good NBA draft, might I add. Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, and Cade Cunningham seem to be the real deal in my opinion. Then I believe that'll get you back to contention way quicker than just holding on to Bradley Beal for dear life. If you look at the man, I believe he deserves better than this as well. Washington, it's been 9 years and it's time to move on from him. But I have to give it to Bradley Beal. He is an absolute class act for not demanding a trade thus far. Now, I really didn't know whether I should include this next player on this list because I'm fairly confident that this individual is more likely to get bought out than traded, but what the heck. Blake Griffin. If you take a look at Blake Griffin, he has been abysmal this year. Don't let the fancy good highlights on the screen fool you, because this is a player that's currently averaging 12 points per game, 5.4 total rebounds per game, 3.6 assists per game, shooting 36% from the field and 31% from three, with a PER of 9.8. Bear in mind, this is a player that is getting paid maximum money. Now, I wanted to make a dedicated video on Blake Griffin because I find his situation to be the most interesting, and my personal opinion on what's going on with him is, honestly, he just has no motivation anymore, and I can't really blame him. After going from a team that is so close to playing in the NBA Finals to 4 years later, you find yourself on the Detroit Pistons, who have been pretty much nowhere close to contention over the last 3 years and are just progressively getting worse and worse. This past year being the absolute worst because they didn't even attempt to keep Luke Kennard. They sold him. A year ago, they traded Andre Drummond. They just traded Derrick Rose. Yeah, he has Jeremy Grant, who's a stud on his team, but at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Blake Griffin is playing so bad just so he could get bought out by the Detroit Pistons. I don't think there's a single team in the NBA that'd be willing to take on his contract because, well, who wants to pay a max contract player that's averaging 12 points per game off of 36% shooting a maximum contract? I don't think anyone does, and I don't think the Detroit Pistons want to give up a first-round pick in order to move Blake Griffin and take on his contract. But I guess you could consider Blake Griffin to be an honorable mention on this list. Up next, we have Victor Oladipo, and in Victor Oladipo's case, we understand that he just got traded, so you wouldn't think he'd be on the move again, right? Well, if you couple the fact that reports surfaced really quickly about the Rockets only acquiring Oladipo as a trade chip, plus the fact that Oladipo has been flirting with the Miami Heat over the past, 2 years, and the fact that there's virtually no chance that he's going to be re-signing with the Houston Rockets past this year, then it makes a lot of sense to assume that the Houston Rockets would do whatever it takes to trade Victor Oladipo by the trade deadline. As a matter of fact, I think he's the most likely player to get traded by the trade deadline on this list. The problem is, this is a player that has been consistently flirting with the Miami Heat. So why would the Miami Heat give up multiple assets to trade for Oladipo when you could just sign him this offseason in free agency? Maybe the fact that the Miami Heat are so desperate to get some help because they haven't been performing so far would do something with it, but I don't really think that's necessarily the case. I don't know if Victor Oladipo would be enough to give the Miami Heat the resurgence that they crave, but nevertheless, look for a team to take a flyer on Oladipo very similarly to the way the Indiana Pacers took a flyer on Evan Turner about a decade ago, a team that is trying to make a push in the NBA playoffs that could use some extra help, that hope that Victor Oladipo's tenure with the new contending team wouldn't be even close to how Evan Turner's tenure with the Indiana Pacers went a decade ago. Then you have Zach LaVine, a player that has been absolutely remarkable for the Chicago Bulls. The problem is, he is the captain of a fairly mediocre team on the Eastern Conference. Don't get me wrong, he's a remarkable player. That 9 3-pointer game over the New Orleans Pelicans was remarkable. Scoring 46 points, grabbing 7 rebounds, and going plus 20 in the plus minus category was awesome as well. But the Chicago Bulls are essentially in NBA purgatory. They're not terrible enough to tank for a top lottery pick, but they're not good enough to make it into the upper seeds of the Eastern Conference in the NBA playoffs. You see, the issue with Zach LaVine is his contract is set to expire at the end of next year. He just seems like a player that is destined to be overpaid in free agency. Some team is going to offer Zach LaVine the max, and in my opinion, he is not a max contract player on a championship team. Not because he's not good enough offensively, mainly because he's not good enough defensively. He's a shooting guard that is a remarkable offensive weapon that is terrible defensively, kind of like James Harden and Bradley Beal, who have not really smelled any type of team success. And Zach LaVine isn't even close to being the type of offensive player that James Harden is. Nor is he even close to being the type of player that Bradley Beal is offensively as well. As a matter of fact, Zach LaVine is worse than both of these aforementioned players in defense and isn't nearly as good as them offensively, which is enough reason for the Chicago Bulls to trade him while his value is absolutely at its peak, take a short-term dip in terms of team success, but receive a remarkable haul for him that could contribute to their ability to build a better team in the future. And finally, we have DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan's career with the San Antonio Spurs has been very subpar to say the least. Originally, he was supposed to be the consolation prize for trading Kawhi Leonard to the Toronto Raptors originally, and unfortunately, Greg Popovich hasn't been able to get the same type of success out of LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan as he was able to get out of Kawhi Leonard, Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker. Who would have ever imagined this would be the case? This is a scenario where DeMar DeRozan has been playing in the NBA for 12 years, and it's in his best interest to finally go to a team that could potentially help him win a championship on. I can imagine that in free agency, he'll try to find his way to an LA-based team because, well, he's originally from Los Angeles, but for now, the Spurs just want to get whatever return they can get out of LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan because chances are these are two players that will not be on their team next year. And finally, is any trade list complete without Lonzo Ball? Let me get something straight. I love Lonzo Ball as a player. I think he's a remarkable piece to have, and I think he could even be a starting caliber point guard on a championship team. And of course, he has been marginally improving each and every year throughout his entire career. But that's about it. There's been a marginal improvement each and every year, not like a Giannis Antetokounmpo sized improvement each and every year. At the time of this video, he's averaging 14 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 4.7 assists with a 14.6 PER and shooting 37% from 3. That's just enough to justify your existence in the NBA, and he is a fairly solid defensive player. But he's not a game-changing point guard. He's not anywhere near the talent level that a number 2 overall pick should be. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for the fact that he changed his jump shot and the fact that he possesses a tremendous basketball IQ, he'd be very similar to Michael Kidd-Gilchrist in a point guard's body. And the reason why I'm saying that it's extremely likely he gets traded is he's set to hit restricted free agency. And no matter what, a team is going to offer this man a ton of money just based off the fact that he is Lonzo Ball. And I can't imagine the New Orleans Pelicans matching that. So as a result, you might as well trade him and at least get something in return. But that's my opinion. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about this list. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.